Few epic sci-fi series have had such an impact on me as a reader as Red Rising by Pierce Brown, and in this video we are going to get into the lore and backstory to the universe crafted by this author and lightly touch on some of the initiating incidents within the first book to act as a setup to see if this setting could interest you as the reader. So without any further ado, let's go over some of the basics for the Red Rising universe. Getting into just the basics to approach as a reader, this does fall into more of the grim, dark sci-fi territory and is broken up into two separate trilogies. The first trilogy, known as Red Rising, is composed of the first book called Red Rising, the second book titled Golden Sun, and the third Morning Star. Personally, I believe the first book is the weakest, with a significant step up in quality to book 2 and 3. A solar system spanning series, this does absolutely fall into the space opera subgenre, and let's go ahead and talk about how this society came into existence. Roughly 700 years ago, over the last 14 generations of man, a ruling class has had a near complete control on the lives of the inhabitants of our solar system, a population of roughly 18 billion souls. Of course, life was not always this way. There was a governing authority on Earth that was overthrown by the current society. Now, life is broken down into a class system organized by colors, ruled over by an oligarch hierarchy. The golds are the ruling class, and now we will talk about every single color and their positions in society. The high colors are the ones that are provided with the most genetic enhancements and benefits of this society. Yes, there are sci-fi enhancements happening on the biological level, are broken down into golds, who are the rulers of society, silvers, who are the financiers and businessmen, whites, who are clergy and judges, and coppers, who are the administrators, lawyers, and bureaucrats. Below them are the mid-colors. These are broken down into blues, who are in the bridge crews of starships and pilots, the yellows, who are the doctors and researchers of society, the greens, who are the programmers and technicians, violets, who are artisans and other creatives, oranges, who are mechanics and engineers, and grays, who are regular soldiers and police. I do want to note, while we are talking about soldiers and military, the society's military is broken up mainly into 8 separate starship fleets. These become very important later on in the series. But as we enter the low colors, here is obviously where the conflict emerges. This oppressed sect of society essentially bears the burden of providing enough resources and value for the other higher colors and mid colors to benefit from. Here we have browns, who are servants, cooks, and janitors, obsidians, who are elite soldiers, but viewed as lesser than others because they are specifically bred for nothing but fighting and therefore are seen as brutes. Pinks, who are pleasure slaves and social functionaries, and reds, who are manual laborers. Now, how exactly these lower colors can be manipulated can be found in the initiating incidents of Book 1, which, very early on spoilers, we are going to get into now. Our main protagonist, Darrow, works in a Mars mine, believing his daily labors will eventually lead to the complete terraforming of Mars and the benefit of future generations. Through tragic events, people near him die, and he discovers that no, Mars was successfully terraformed generations ago, and his lifelong devotion to mining helium-3 has done nothing but provide the precious resource to an already opulent society flourishing in the ground above. This would seem to be enough to drive anyone into rebellion. And thus begins the story of Darrow, a man so driven by revenge he becomes a plague onto the upper echelons of this culture. The first book in the series, Red Rising, focuses on Darrow infiltrating the higher echelons of society and working his way through their political games into a position of potential power. The narrative follows almost a darker Hunger Games type story, but I would actually say it goes beyond that. Instead of individual versus individual, it's a lot more of a faction versus faction play. Alliances are made and small armies form, as well as lifelong bonds and friendships, as well as enemies. After the first book, though, this smaller setting is abandoned, and a wider space opera type narrative begins to unfold within the pages, and here is where I believe Red Rising really comes into its glorious potential. Red Rising as a series focuses on many things thematically: purpose, revenge, the cost of war, the self-destruction and growth that can happen when someone is set on a path that is so covered in shadow, as well as new love and, of course, wider societal issues. Many parallels, of course, in stories like this can be drawn to our own world as well, though Pierce Brown does not make any such thematic observations overly overt. The writing style, I believe, drastically improves as the series progresses, and it goes from what I would consider rather average in the first book, with a flair for rather extraordinary naming, and then transcends into some of the most emotionally impactful first-person character-driven writing I have ever come across. Through beautifully character-motivated story beats, you will find yourself laughing, crying, and filled with anger as the massive amounts of hypocrisy and political play unfurl within the chapters. But let's get back into some more of the details here. Red Rising is known for its brutality, not only in individual combat, but how it handles battles as well. It does tread into some of the more extraordinary feats for its characters, but with these superhuman enhancements that are applied to them, it still most of the time seems very believable. And with Pierce Brown's ability to write action with a very distinct level of emotion, usually you're caught up enough in the pages to not question the extraordinary feats of the characters we follow. I'm very partial to his play with words, calling things like iron rain and describing the action in space. It's truly beautiful. But what really makes Red Rising interesting and stand above a lot of other action-focused science fiction is the underlying currents of real human connection. You will feel friendships grow and blossom, and that is something I have been preaching for authors to focus on more and more. Develop real, vibrant friendships within the pages, and that is another area where Pierce Brown shines. You will feel a part of this team as the reader, and as they pay the price of warfare, your heart will break for them, but you will also feel their accomplishments, and that is maybe Pierce Brown's greatest strength as an author, putting you amongst his crew and making you deeply emotionally invested in their progress. Really, the balance struck between character-motivated beats within the story while balancing these larger factions at play, epic warfare, and with the characters constantly having to live in deceit and misdirection to just stay alive. Red Rising accomplishes an extraordinary blend of making you, the reader, feel so grounded next to the characters while having these A Song of Ice and Fire level politics happening. I love seeing the political intrigue and forces at play and maneuvering with the individuals trying to survive. Pierce Brown accomplishes such tension with this setting. Love also does play a fairly strong role, and you will see what emotional damage and trauma can do to a main protagonist who feels so sincerely flawed yet understood that you can be frustrated with him yet want to give him a hug all at once. Darrow, as a main character, is one of my favorites of recent memory. Now, personally, I have only read the first 4 books, and I cannot speak on the conclusion, but what I can very thankfully say is that Red Rising as a series, just the first 3 trilogy, which is conclusive in its own right, is worth a read as a standalone, and you as the reader from there can nicely decide if you'd like to keep going or not. So this is one of the sci-fi series that has a fantastic stopping point where you can decide as a reader if you've reached enough catharsis, though I am willing to put money down, especially with my review coming down the road of Iron Gold, you will want to continue going because Pierce Brown is an author I have deeply enjoyed watching grow throughout his series. But that is my overall recommendation and description for Red Rising. It's one of the series I recommend the most to fans of people like Joe Abercrombie or Evan Winter, those who like a grim, dark approach to storytelling, but are also interested in delving into the wider, grander sci-fi. Maybe you'll have to push through the first book, but the second and third I think will win most people over, and a lot of fans do still love that first book. It's just a personal note for me that it wasn't my favorite. Anyway, let me know what you think of Red Rising in the comments down below if you've already read it and you love it, or if this has convinced you to pick it up or not. Like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here, and have a beautiful one, y'all. Peace.